From the House of Sungo, this is GayTopix Confessions. I'm your host, Kenny Cruz, and these are real-life events that had happened to me as a gay man. Anyone in the LGBTQ community has a story. These are my stories, my confessions. There is nothing fabricated or fake about any of these true events. These are actual events that happened to me. I'm sharing my story because I am mentally a mess. I'm going through a lot of emotions and a lot of distress, and I don't know what I should do or where I should go because there's no one here. It's just me and the camera. So I thought it would be preeminent enough for me to speak directly to the camera, so one day my story will actually be heard. Again, these are true events. These actually happened to me, living my life as a gay man. Remember, you're always in the mix with GayTopix. I'm sitting here watching Court Cam on A&E. It's a show about what happens in the courtroom and some of the events that criminals take in order to evade arrest and sentencing, and their actual footage of live courtroom proceedings. And it just brought an idea to my head about my life in the courtroom. And I'm going to share stories with you in relation to the courtroom. So this is Courtroom Confessions. I'm your host, Kenny Cruz. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share. And please get help for me. Let's start when I was a kid. I've been in the courtroom for relatively everything you can possibly imagine. I was arrested. I was in housing court. I was in family court. I was in judicial court. I was in court when I was being sworn into the military. I was in court when I was being sworn into the police academy. I've seen many, many, many judges over the years, and these are some of those stories. As a gay man, the very first time I appeared in court was when I told police officers that my stepfather was molesting me, and they didn't arrest him. We just went to family court. They hired an ACS worker. The ACS worker would do weekly visits and would see that there was no food in the refrigerator or no clothing or anything like that. So the ACS caseworker stood up and went clothes shopping for me and would buy food for me and my other siblings. More or less me, because the abuse was only targeted to me. And at one point, seeing the judge, all I wanted to be was in a safe environment. And they kept putting me in group home after group home after group home, because each group home that I went to, I was always a prime target of abuse and harassment and beatings, and I was constantly jumped and beat up and had to be removed for my safety. And they would place me in another group home, and the group home would relatively be the same environment. The group home was filled. This is before gay marriage and gay, anything that was legalized in relation to the LGBTQ community. There were no gay rights. There were no gay rights. I was essentially a voice that was not heard, and when I feel someone who is gay or like trans, they should not be put in the same environment as straight or male or female population, because we are our own community. People are starting to realize that now, and it's taking all these years for people to realize that. But back then, it wasn't like that. So I was forced to be in group homes with people who I did not get along with, people who hated the color of my skin, people who hated me for being me and existing as a effeminate boy, people who were basic criminals, with felony charges against them. And I was being put in this environment from truancy and things like that when I was a kid. But this is the first recollection I can remember being in court. I'll get to the truancy in a minute, but this is the first recollection I can recall being in a courtroom. And it was probably like the fourth time I was standing in front of the judge. Mind you, I'm a minor. My mother or any legal guardian was not present. It was always a caseworker from ACS. And the ACS caseworker was on the side of the city. And I can't argue with them for doing their job, but yet it was a lack of them doing their job, because they kept putting my life in harm's way by placing me in these group homes. And after a while, I just kept jumping from one group home to the next, and one foster agency to the next, one foster care agency to the next. And eventually, it was like the fourth or fifth time, maybe even the sixth time, that I went to court to see the same judge, and the judge was frustrated with me appearing in front of him without a legal guardian. And he kept asking me what the issue was, and I kept telling him and telling my ACS worker, who was talking and conversing with my legal aid attorney, that it was not a right fit for me to be in any group home, because it was jeopardizing my life and putting my life in harm's way. And I begged and I pleaded that the only safe space for me to be in was in my room. I said in previous episodes of my confessions that I've been stuck inside a room. To this day, as I'm talking to this camera right now, I'm stuck inside a room. It's my safe space. It's my sanctuary. I kept begging and pleading to be placed back home. And finally, like I said, after seeing a judge maybe 5 or 6 different times, he agreed, and they placed me back home at my house. But my stepfather was never arrested or charged or removed from the house. And I didn't understand that, why you would take a victim and put the victim back with the alleged abuser in the same household. It didn't make sense to me. It still doesn't make sense to me. But with the weekly checkups with ACS, and then them doing the things that my mother should have done as a mother, everything was fine, or under wraps. Because the abuse continued. It went on from 8 years old to 13, and the abuse continued. And it just kept going. And even though ACS was there, the fact that it kept going on and on and on, and he wasn't removed, I consider that to be normal, and it was how it was, and I had no choice or say in anything that was going on. So he was there and I was there, and I had to put up with it. And no matter how many times I spoke up, ACS was still there. So this is what I'm saying. There have been so many people that have been actively involved in my life who knew what was going on and didn't act upon it or put me in a better situation than what I was. So the abuse continued on and on and on, even with ACS knowing and the NYPD even knowing. To this day, like, he has never served any jail time. But after 13 years old, it stopped, and it went on to my siblings, and my siblings started to abuse me, my two older brothers, and I can remember every day after school, my brother would sexually molest me, and there was a lot of incest going on, and my older brother would force me, and if I didn't comply, he would hit me. And again, I thought that was normal because that was what my stepfather was doing to me, and when I didn't comply with him, he would beat me, and sometimes he would hit me with extension cords, and broomsticks would break, and his hands, and he would force me to stand in certain positions for long periods of time, and metal spatulas, and my skin was so bruised, I couldn't wear short sleeves or long, shorts, because the the abuse was clearly visible, so I had to hide it, and it just kept going on, and eventually, when I was 15, I stopped it all because that's when I started dating Uncle Juan, and Uncle Juan was my manager at McDonald's, and that went on until I was 18. So all of this abuse had been going on, and at this point, as growing up, I thought it was okay, and this was what normal families go through, you know. And no matter how many times I spoke up, no one actually heard me. And so that was the first time I saw a judge. And the first recollection, there were other recollections that I have when seeing a judge, because I didn't want to go to school, because the school was just like the group home. And I was being forced to go to school where I was abused and harassed and bullied and beat up and jumped. I would come home with like black eyes and bloody lips, and my mother did absolutely nothing. She didn't go to the school to fight or try to protect me. She did absolutely nothing. The deans and everything like that did nothing. It was part of going to a public school in the ghetto, but the reason, that is the reason why the issue was. So I tried to fight my hardest to get out of that school and be placed into another school. And I thought maybe perhaps if I went to a majority white school, it wouldn't matter, because my school was majority black, and 90%, I'm going to say, was black, because Far Rockaway is essentially the ghetto. It's Ghetto Island, as they call it. And I was the only white boy. I'm not white, but they always looked at me like I was white. And even to this day, people still assume that I'm white in the neighborhood that I live in, Harlem, and I'm not white. I'm not. But I don't think I actually really do know my culture and heritage, because my father wasn't really my father. My mother cheated on my father and got pregnant, and me and my sister were born, and she cheated on him again, and I had my younger brother, and we were all white. And my neighbor was white, and his name was the same name as me, Kenny, and I look back at it now and think that maybe he was my father. You know, my mother had once said when she gave birth to my little brother, she also had twins as well. But one of the twins had died. Surprisingly enough, at that same time, the neighbor upstairs, named Kenny, had a girl, and her name was the same name as my mother. I look back at it now and I'm like, that's the twin that my mother said died. You know, my neighbors hated my mother. Everybody hated my mother because of the things that she did to me. But yet they allowed the abuse to continue. The courts allowed it to continue. The police allowed it to continue. ACS allowed it to continue. Teachers allowed it to continue. School administrators allowed it to continue. Everyone allowed the abuse to continue, so I thought it was normal. So I stopped complaining. And I hated going to school because I was always beat up. Always. I had to fight for my life in my house and outside my house. Everywhere I went, I had to fight. I had to fight. And I was tired of fighting because it was always more than I can handle. I mean, if it was a one-on-one fight, that's fine. But it was always like 4-on-1 or 6-on-1 or 7-on-1, and I was always outnumbered and beat up. And I hated going to school because of that. There was no point in me even trying to get an education because when I did go to school, my other classmates were so loud and obnoxious and rude that the teacher couldn't even teach because they were so ghetto. I remember too, like, Reagan was the president, and in the history books that we had in the school, they were so outdated. They had Nixon as the last president. Nixon. There's a big difference from Nixon to Reagan. There was at least another president in there. I can't think right now, but there was at least another president in the middle. You know, and I couldn't, there was no education. I wasn't learning anything. I was just having to fight. So I stopped going to school, and I guess it was the same for my other siblings because they never went to school either. But my mother always called the police and the truant police on me. I never understood that because they were doing the same thing that I was doing, and yet they weren't arrested or put in truancy. I was. So the truant officer would come and put me in handcuffs, and they would put me into a facility like a cafeteria full of people who never went to school, were criminals, and were in and out of jail, and it was the same type of behavior toward me and the same type of reaction where people beat me up and abused me and physically assaulted me, and I was constantly bullied. But at one point, the truancy, because I was in truant, there was like maybe 300 and something days out of the school year, and it was maybe like 175 that I didn't go. So I was arrested maybe perhaps 175, 200 times, and finally I get to meet a judge, and I try to explain myself to the judge, you know, through my court-appointed attorney, and again, it's legal aid, so they're not really fighting for you. They're just there, and the judge didn't listen and put me in this place called Spofford, and I was in Spofford, which was a lot worse than the cafeteria that I was being put in when I was truant, or a lot worse than my actual home, because now they're actual criminals, and these criminals were, you know, arrested and put into this juvenile detention center, and oh boy, I hated it. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And I couldn't understand why no one was hearing me or no one was listening to me or why they kept putting me in these situations that were jeopardizing my life. And the next time I remember being in front of a judge, let's keep going forward. Um, I'm when I was homeless after coming home from the military, and I was in a shelter for 3 years with my dog. Um, I looked at an apartment in the Bronx. I never wanted to live in the Bronx. I never wanted anything to do with the Bronx because of its long-standing history of being in the news every single day. To this day, the Bronx is in the news every single day for something. And I didn't want to be there. And I had no choice because I didn't want to continue to live in the shelter. So they they showed me in an apartment, and the apartment was nice. It was renovated. It was cute. It had, everything was new and new floors, everything like that. And I agreed, and I signed a lease. And the day that I moved in, I had to move into a different apartment. So it was like a bait and switch type thing. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is not the apartment that I wanted. What's going on? So I tried to battle it out with the landlord, but the landlord, like everyone else, refused to listen to me. And told me that it was absurd that I even had the gall and to bring up these allegations of bait and switch, and I didn't know what I was talking about, and it gave us a kind of like a rift between each other, and we never really essentially got along because of that. And I, whenever someone in New York goes through any type of housing issue, we go to housing court, and I I didn't want to live there, and I damn sure wasn't going to pay the $1,000 rent that they were asking for. So I was like, okay, this is not my apartment. The landlord's not listening to me. It's infested with roaches and rats and stuff like that, and my dog is literally eating rats, and putting them in his bowl. And there were so many roaches that they might as well have paid the rent because there were so many of them. And I didn't know where they were coming from. And because I myself am clean. I have a dog. I have to keep my apartment clean, and I stopped paying rent, and I didn't pay rent for a while, and I would have to go to a court. And knowing my research skills, because that's one of the things I commend myself about, is that I have, that's what journalism has done for me, is allow me to investigate and search and basically see things that normal people don't actually recognize or see. So every time we went to court, I always brought up something like, oh, there's many violations on this building. Oh, this building isn't even registered with code enforcement. Oh, the code wasn't the code was violated. So it was always something that I brought to the judge's attention. So therefore, he kept adjourning it, and the adjournment kept going on every single month. And it went on for over a year and a half. So 2 years I lived in the Bronx, and I never paid rent. But I had to pay that money back because I was essentially squatting, and the judge was fed up with me, and he said, how many adjournments do you need, And when you go to housing court, the first lawyer you speak to is the lawyer for the landlord. And sometimes they try to strike a deal with you. Other times they try to bribe you. There are other times that, they don't even listen. They just want their money, And then you have your attorney, and your attorney is basically legal aid and fighting on your behalf. But again, it's legal aid, so they're not really doing the job that they were ordered to do or should be doing. But because of my knowledge and my research, I was able to bring up these adjournments and these motions where the case was adjourned every single month, and this went on for 2 years. And After 2 years, the judge finally got fed up with me and was like, okay, where's the money for the rent? I had no money. What was I to do? You know, I had no place to go, nothing like that. And the money that I was saved up, I wanted to go to a new apartment. But that kind of hurt me in the process too, because it ruined my credit and there was negative remarks on my credit report, so it prevented me from actually finding another apartment, and the struggle for finding another apartment was really hard. So I needed time now to find another apartment. The judge didn't want to hear it, so I was told to vacate the apartment. Otherwise, the marshals would come and remove me. I didn't believe them. It's Memorial Day next weekend, and this actually happened on Memorial Day weekend. And I remember it being Memorial Day weekend. And every day I had problems sleeping because I didn't know when the marshals would come, you know, and when they would evict me, because essentially I was evicted and I owed them all this money and the marshals were coming. I never knew when they were coming. And it took months for them to come. And Memorial Day weekend, they showed up, and it was like 5 o'clock in the morning, and they wouldn't even let me brush my teeth, and they just kicked me and the dog out, reminding me of when I was evicted from my actual home as a child and being put on the street with King. Same pattern repeating itself over and over and over again. And so I was stuck on the street, but I had the smarts. I wasn't going to let them kick me out and leave my stuff there. No, sir. So what? I waited an hour or two, and I walked the dog around the neighborhood, and I waited for a good amount of time, you know, because like I said, it was like 5 o'clock in the morning, so I waited for a good amount of time. So maybe it was like 9, 10. I went back, and I saw that they had changed the locks. So what I did was I went to the locksmith across the street and had them change the locks, because the electricity was still on. I was still paying the electricity, everything like that. So I had them rechange the locks, and I was in my apartment for another 2 weeks. That allowed me enough time to actually put stuff into storage, you know, so I was able to actually get ready. And they eventually caught up with me and rechanged the locks and ordered me to give them the key to the building, so I couldn't go back. Another time, I had to stand in front of a judge. I've been living now in Harlem now 13 years, and it was maybe like 2 years in, 3 years in, maybe 4. I remember going to the grocery store, and as I previously said with my aunt, we would go like from store to store shopping, and I do the same thing with groceries because I barely have enough money to survive on my own with my veteran benefits. So I would go store to see what's on sale and get all these different sale items and eventually stock up my fridge. So I remember going to this store on Lenox Avenue. I think it was a Pioneer supermarket. And I bought all these groceries, and I'm holding the bags because I'm that person that, you know, if you can't make it in one trip, you're not going back. So I was carrying all these bags, and I was going down Stivers Row. Stivers Row is on 139th Street. And I was between Lenox and 7th, which is a completely different area from 7th and 8th and 139th, you know. It was a completely different world. Like, whoa, if you go there today, you can see the difference. It's very dramatic. And it was really ghetto. And the buildings were unkept. There was garbage on the street and people loitering outside and begging for spare change. But it was a short block from Lenox to 7th. And then from 7th to 8th, it was a much longer block. But that was a much nicer block. But we're on the same street, 139th Street. So I I'm between Lenox and 7th, and as I'm walking with all my bags, I see a kid literally on the street. And why is he on the street? And I shake him because he had Beats headphones, they were big, a Yankee fitted cap, and jeans that were pulled off his ass and laid on the ground. And people were just walking by him. But you can clearly see he was a kid. So that disturbed me, and my military instincts automatically kicked in, and I knew something was wrong. So I called 911, and they told me that a bus would come. A bus is an ambulance. So they told me that the bus would come, and I mean, given the fact that we're in New York City and in Manhattan, I figured it would take a while for the ambulance to arrive because of traffic. But on 135th Street and Lenox Avenue is Harlem Hospital. So it's only 4 blocks away from the hospital. So I didn't understand why, at this point, 10 minutes had passed. And in this time frame, I'm actually trying to communicate with this kid. And he looks at me. Though he looks at me, there are no pupils in his eyes. Everything was white. And he falls down. I immediately start chest compressions. And he gets up again. And I put my hand right here to my mouth and I said, "Can you read my lips?" He nodded his head and a tear fell from his eye. I knew something was wrong and something immediately had to happen. So he was alive and alert, but something was wrong because he had no pupils. So it's now 10 minutes later and I'm like, okay, where the fuck is this ambulance? I call 911 again and they tell me the ambulance is coming, but the bus hasn't arrived yet. So another 5, maybe 6 minutes had passed. So now we're 15 minutes into it and I'm standing there trying to get all his senses working. So I said, "Can you read my lips?" He said yes. So I knew that he can hear. I knew he can see because he's reading my lips. So I had oranges. So I peeled an orange and I put it up to his nose, hoping that he would actually eat the peel, but he didn't. But he can smell it because he moved it away, his head away. So I knew he can smell it. And as I'm doing all this, I'm waiting for the ambulance to arrive. And finally, the ambulance didn't arrive, but a police car did. And I'm thinking that the police car was going to come to the scene, but they were driving past. They were driving past me. So I jumped in the middle of the street and waved them down, and they get out, and the officers come between the cars that were parked and see the kid laying there. They get on a walkie-talkie, and I kid you not, in a matter of seconds, the bus comes up and pulls up. And the EMTs come out and they put him on a stretcher and they put him inside the ambulance. And I could see the ambulance moving up and down, so they continued the chest compressions. Now the police officer is asking me questions and things like that, and what was going on and what I saw and what the scene was and everything like that. Now people started to actually come and migrate toward the scene because now it was a scene, and an active scene at that. And I'm like, these people have left him there, and yet now that the police and ambulance are here, they all want to know what's going on. To me, that shows what type of people they are and the lack of humanity they had in regard to this child, and one of the EMTs comes out of the ambulance and says, "Who's the guy who called it in?" And I said, "I did." He said, "Do you know, in another 5 minutes, he would have died. You saved his life." I said, "What do you mean?" He apparently was ODing. His friend left him on the street after giving him a K2 laced with crystal meth blunt to smoke. Now, everybody knows the dangers of K2, but when you add crystal meth to the mix, it just makes it worse. And this is a 15-year-old boy. So I wrote my name and a number down, and I said to the officer, I said, when he gets out of this, I want him to know who I am, and I want him to know that I saved his life, and I will do everything I can in my power to keep him recovered. So please give him my name and number. It was maybe like, and I'm crying because I'm getting to the part where I see the judge. Now you're asking why I see a judge? Let me tell the story, please. It's like maybe 3 days later, the officer called me and says, "The media is here at the police station. Would you like to tell your story on what you did as a hero and save this boy's life and tell the dangers of K2?" Now I'm thinking it's Channel 7 or Channel 5, where I grew up with the reporters, so I had my own mental relationship with these people that I see on TV every single day as I grew up. So I said, hell yeah, I would love to tell the story because it is compelling. Unbeknownst to me, when I walked through the police station, they put me in handcuffs. I don't know why the officer, given the circumstances of the situation, why the officer had to do this, but what he did was he took my name and my number and searched in the computer, and he saw that I had an open warrant. This is 2017, and the warrant was from 2010. The statute of limitations is 7 years. It should have been eliminated already. I had no idea what the warrant was for. To this day, I don't. They don't, because they arrested me and they kept me in jail for 52 hours because they kept searching and searching and searching to try to find what the actual warrant was for. But because it was so old, everything was probably put in storage, I guess, and they had to find out what the warrant was for. And time was just wasting away while I sat in jail. And I was pitching pennies. I was communicating with other people, listening to their stories on why they were arrested and telling them my story, and everyone thought it was really wrong of the officer to even do something like that, but I guess he was trying to fill his quota, was the reason why I was arrested. But finally, when I got to see the judge, they had no record of the warrant, and they dismissed it. But I spent 52 hours in the Tombs. The Tombs is a detention jail center here in New York City, and everybody knows the Tombs to be very decrepit and a place that no one ever wants to be. And I was put there for 52 hours, and my dog was at home all alone, starving, didn't go out. And I remember when I was in the jail, there was a guy who had a card because it was $13 for 5 minutes. That's how much it cost. $13 for 5 minutes. And so this guy had a calling card, and he was doing three-way with someone that he was speaking to and allowing other people to use the phone to call for their loved ones or whatever to tell them that they were in jail. And he asked me, do I have anybody to call? And I said, no. And that's really kind of fucked up in a way. It's like, here I am in jail, and I don't have anybody to call or try to bail me out, or even speak to or tell them what actually happened, So they released me on my own recognizance, and I had to do a follow-up court visit, I think 2 or 3 times. And eventually the case was dismissed because they could not find the warrant or what I was, the warrant was for. And when I told the story of how I was arrested, I guess the judge had some type of compassion and felt that it wasn't needed for me to even be in the courtroom. So they released me and the case was dismissed. There was another court appearance. These are so hard. My life has been so hard. So hard. And And yet here I am. And I have to be amazed by the strength that I have, but the strength can only go so much, because how can one person deal with this all by himself? There's only but so much one can deal with and go through. And at this point in this stage of my life, I don't think I can do this anymore. The next time I saw a judge, I was walking my dog here in Harlem. It was World Pride Day. World Pride Day. 2018. So this was a year later. And I was walking my dog. This guy used to live in my building, but he got a job as a porter in a brand new building that they built here in the neighborhood. As you know, Bloomberg had this idea that he was going to fill every space with residential property. He was actually the only mayor to actually do what he actually said he was going to do. That's why he served 3 terms. You know, he was a very good mayor, but he made the city so expensive and so extremely difficult to live in. But I would vote him in a 4th term, given the opportunity, because he was an impeccable mayor, you know. Anyway, so there was a new building being built, and the entrance was maybe about 150 feet from the side entrance on the same side of the street. There was a tree in front of the door of the entrance, and then 150 feet away, there was like a little grassy area, but no tree. Now, I know people who lived in the building, who had just moved into the building because it just opened up. They had dogs, and their dogs would pee on the tree like any other dog would do. You know, the first tree they see is the first thing that they're going to pee on. And so my dog, it's a cafe on the corner, and most of us would meet at the cafe who have dogs, get out morning coffee, and then we would go to the park. And it was like a routine for us, you know. And this day I decided to go the opposite direction, and I went the opposite way, and it's next to the building on the side entrance in that little grassy area. Now, in this little grassy area, there was already dog shit. There was already garbage and litter and liquor bottles and cigarette butts and, you know, the leftovers of the cigar when someone rolls it up for weed, and it was filthy. And my dog peed there, and he tells me that I couldn't let my dog pee there. And I said, well, how are you to tell me that I can tell my dog where he can use the bathroom? That's like me telling you you can't use the bathroom. My dog is blind. He's also deaf, and he's old. I can't tell him when he's going to use the bathroom or not. He does it when he needs to do it, just like you do it. He started cursing at me and calling me all types of names. Mind you, like I said, he used to live in my building. Now, I've lived in my neighborhood at this time in 2018 9 years, 10 years, and he kept cursing me out and calling me all these names. He never spoke to me a day in his life. He would see me all the time walking my dog, but it wasn't until that day, on World Pride Day, that he spoke to me. And he spoke to me very derogatory and very abusive and very disrespectful, and calling me all types of names and racist slurs and homophobic slurs, and I had to call the police. And he got angry at me for calling the police, so he got even more upset. And he hit me. He punched me in my face, and I can remember my face swelling up a little bit, and my ear was ringing. And when the police arrived, I told them what happened, and they had the audacity. I couldn't believe it. I was like, whoa. They had the audacity to give me a ticket for, what was it? Disorderly conduct. I had no idea why this was happening. I'm like, okay, he's calling me the F word, faggot. You know, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm seeking out your assistance. I called you for help because he assaulted me. And he used all these homophobic slurs against me. And you write a ticket for me as for disorderly conduct? So I thought to myself as I'm talking to the police, I'm like, okay, so it's okay for him to call me the F word, so I could call him the N word, right? No, 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 that's inappropriate. You can't do that. I'm like, well, you just gave me a ticket for disorderly conduct, so I could do whatever the fuck I want to do right now. You know, so unless you're going to arrest me, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to cease this, and I'm not going to let him get away with this, because in the ghetto, if you do not stick up for yourself, people are going to continue to target you and abuse you and assault you and basically, you know, bully you because they see weakness. And I'm not weak, and I'm not going to allow this to happen. So I went after him, and I ran down the street to look for him, and that's when the police took me and they threw me against the wall, and a brick wall at that, and they put me in handcuffs. And at this point, my face was already swelled up, and like I said, my ear was ringing. So I kept ordering them to release me, and it was a struggle because I didn't do anything wrong. So in the midst of the struggle, an ambulance comes. Now, anywhere in New York City, EMTs come along with the police. So I told them that I want to speak to the EMTs and I need medical assistance. You know, you're arresting me under frivolous charges, and this man was clearly in a hate crime, you know, actively, you know, engaging in a hate crime, and yet you did nothing. You did absolutely nothing. And so when I went to stick up and defend myself, you arrest me and give me a ticket for disorderly conduct. I felt so disrespected, particularly the fact that it was World Pride Day, and as a gay man, it was very disheartening to know that the law was not on my side. So when I got into the ambulance, they checked me out and did an evaluation, and they told the police to unhandcuff me, and they would take me to the hospital. Now, the police have to, by their, I guess, training, they have to keep me handcuffed and follow the ambulance to the hospital. And the EMTs protested that and was like, no, you need to let him go. And they released the handcuffs, and I sat in the ambulance, and we drove to the hospital, Harlem Hospital. And as I'm driving to the hospital, the EMT is telling me, calm down, calm down. And I'm like, I can't calm down. This man just violated me because of me being gay, and I got a ticket and was arrested. I don't understand what's happening right now, so how can I be calm? So she tells me it actually happens all the time, and it's very common for individuals who are in the LGBTQ community to be targeted by the police. And I just didn't understand what I was hearing. I couldn't believe that. And I was so ready to go to the parade because it was World Pride Day and Madonna was performing, and I wanted to see Madonna. And I couldn't go because I was in the hospital and my ear was ringing, and eventually it had stopped, but the swelling was still there, so they put an ice pack on me and allowed me to basically vent. And I sat there, and I guess I talked to an administrator or a counselor, I don't know, and I was able to vent. And I sat there for about an hour talking, and they eventually gave me some water and told me to go home and to get some sleep. And I told them that was utterly impossible because of what just actually transpired, and it wasn't going to happen. And now I have this ticket. So the ticket states that for anybody who receives a ticket, you have to go to court. If you don't go to court, then a warrant is issued for your arrest. So I had to go to court. There I am in front of the judge yet again. And they're asking me why I was disorderly, why my conduct was disorderly. And I'm like, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just sticking up for myself, and my dog was just using the bathroom. And according to New York State law, a dog is allowed to urinate anywhere they want. And I said that to the individual who hit me. And I said that to him. I said, this is not your building. You're just a porter. And this is not the entrance. He's like, but I still I don't want to smell it. I was like, it's 10 degrees outside, so what are you really smelling? And why are you standing here smelling out things, According to New York State law, a dog is allowed to urinate anywhere he wants. And I repeated that same sentiment to the man who assaulted me. And I said, my dog would urinate on $1 million homes. And the owners would say nothing, because they understood that's a dog's natural instinct. So he didn't want to hear it because he was unknowledgeable, uneducated, and a loser, basically. And I don't want to smell it. It's why are you standing outside looking to smell pee? That's what I don't understand. More importantly, it's your job as a porter, like all the other supers do every time I walk my dog in the morning, is they take a hose and they spray down the sidewalk. Why couldn't you do that? He was being lazy and didn't want to do his job. So when I'm in court, they're asking me what was going on, and I told them the whole story. And I had to go back because there was a motion on the city side because of the police. And they want to speak to the police officers and stuff like that. And I went back a month later, and they released me on my own recognizance. But I can see now I'm going on an hour, so I'm going to stop. There's many other proceedings that I went to. But again, these are just stories that have happened to me, living life as a gay man. These stories are true. They are not fictional. They are not fabricated. They are real life events that have happened to me as a gay man. All rights reserved. They are my story, my confessions. And with that, I'm going to say, remember, you're always in a mix with GayTopix. I'm your host, Kenny Cruz. I hope I can see you on the next episode. Until then, have a blessed day.